Alright, my darlings. Well, it's Christmas time once again, but unlike last year, I'm not going to be reviewing a Christmas property, mostly because most of them are so hardcore owned by the corporate gods that if I tried to review them, I'd be up to my eyeballs in corporate snow for a month. So I'm going to have a look at something a little bit different this year, something that not only brings me a lot of joy around Christmas time, but all throughout the year, because it's still my all-time favourite TV show since it aired back in 2002, and those who definitely remember this series will know what I'm talking about. Oh yes, it's not Danger Mouse, it's not Watership Down, it's not even The Animals of Farthing Wood. My favourite TV show of all time is the one and only Dick and Dom, Inda Bungalow.
Wake up, Dick and Dom, and get out of bed. Get yourselves dressed, there's a crazy day ahead.
While the title of this show may sound like it belongs to a very inappropriate website to some, this was actually one of the greatest kids shows of all time and helped make CBBC amazing between 2001 and 2006. High stakes competition, cartoon-like humour and excitement, an occasional little sneaky adult joke every once in a while, and plenty of this. But before we let the carnage unfold from this unopened Pandora's box known as Da Bungalow, let's get into a little history, shall we? The titular Dick and Dom are comedian and presenter Richard McCourt and magician Dominic Wood, who both started working out in the BBC as children's presenters in 1996, with Dick being one of the regular hosts between the programmes and Dom appearing on the TV show The Friday Zone, which has to have been one of the inspirations for Da Bungalow given some of the stuff that went on it. And while they weren't yet working together, they were some of the major standout personalities on the network at the time, with the exception of this guy, of course. Although ironically, his connection with Dick and Dom actually goes a lot deeper than you would expect, as we will find out soon. The pair enjoyed some success before they came to work together and eventually became best friends, with Rich even starring in the charity music video of his idols, the Chuckle Brothers, with their song Silly Me, Silly You, alongside other 90s British TV legends such as Dave Benson Phillips, the Demon Headmaster, and the late Mark Spate. So this entire music video gives you more 90s nostalgia in 6.5 minutes than the entire careers of MTV, BuzzFeed, and VH1 combined. But they eventually became to be known as the double act of Dick and Dom by 1998 and in the early 2000s as presenters on the BBC, and became well known for their old school double act chemistry and their out of control nature. Sort of the Abbott and Costello of the BBC, if you will. Though give it a few years and they'll become the Three Stooges -1. They presented CBBC on and off for years and became two of the darlings of children's programming at the time, even appearing on shows such as The Animal Magic Show, where Dom of course got to use his specialised talents, Hyperlinks, and Bring It On, where they would push themselves to do things they hadn't done before, like ride horses in an American corral, or become garage DJs or MCs, or, most significantly, take part in the world-famous Bognor Birdman. Which is an episode I highly recommend you check out, by the way, if you can find it. Come on, BBC, these are memories from our childhoods and you withdraw them from us? Even on the BBC store they're not there. Why do you even have that service if you're not even going to use it? Oh yeah, you don't have it anymore. Sorry. And they even made a very interesting appearance on Blue Peter.
So, well, I'm getting steadily more worried. And rightly so.
Dominic Wood, the Naked Chef, which is actually a persona that will return in Da Bungalow.
Alright then, let's get on with Naked Chef.
But in 2002, they announced that they were going to do their own specialised show, a game show for kids that would be shown on Saturday and Sunday mornings and was going to be shown live to the public, which makes this one of the first live broadcasted Saturday and Sunday morning kids shows. A trend that really caught on for some reason. The show would exemplify everything that Dick and Dom were known for: muck, comedy, over-the-top action, and random humour. And so, on the 31st of August 2002, the world was given the blessing of Dick and Dom in Da Bungalow.
Hello there! What is up, and welcome to Da Bungalow. My name is Dickety Dick.
And my name is Dommity Dom.
So what is there to say about this show? Well, in my opinion, what isn't there to say about this show? Seriously, if I had my way, I could talk about this show for hours. I love this show so much, and there is so much about it that is interesting and hilarious, whether it be from the amazing bits or the parts that failed miserably. I'll get to that later, trust me. But so that I don't bore you to death with my fascination with this weird and wonderful little experiment from the 2000s, let's start from the beginning. The best way that I could describe this show is if the old Nickelodeon game shows like Guts, Legends of the Hidden Temple, and Double Dare were taken to the extreme. So instead of it being 30 minutes or 1 hour episode with a different family or a set of kids the next time the one comes along, each episode was 2 hours long, with some exceptions for series 1, 2 and 5, and the kids, or bungalow heads as they like to call them, partaking in the game will arrive on the Saturday show and play games to win BPs, and that would be bungalow points, not Blue Peters, British Petroleums or Bros points, and indulge in sketches and various other activities with the host, whilst watching the occasional interjected cartoon or pre-recorded interjection done by the boys to break up the show's runtime. And then the points that they earned in the Saturday show would carry on over to the Sunday show, where the same kids would continue to earn points and also gain the chance to gamble their points, and their chance of first place too. And whoever had the most amount of points at the end of the show was declared the winner and won the first prize, and these guys did not mess around with their prizes. While third place you would earn a booby prize pun.
Third prize is a satellite fish, cheese trilby, old lang syne, sandwich, a pram, some jam, some ham and a clam for your man. Des O'Connor sings Iron Maiden.
They're still better than my puns, though admittedly any pun would be. And the second prize was something very typical for a kids game show like a portable DVD player or a Game Boy.
Which for you young'uns and whippersnappers out there, that's what we all played Pokemon on back in the day before you had your watered down version on your iPhones.
But the main prize was always something to reach for. A widescreen telly, a home video games consoles, and the chance to meet a band like Girls Aloud. And thus meet the Tweedy before she became the Cole, or whatever name she goes by these days. Power wheels, mountain bikes, computers, you name it, they gave it away as a first prize. Impressive for a show that couldn't even afford a proper phone.
Are your phones going? Hello?
So with those golden eggs to reach for, what did the kids have to do to get them? Well, the games were set up as being the most ridiculous scenarios you could possibly think of. Now, you may think that with shows such as Double Dare, The Cube, Total Wipeout and Jimmy Kimmel, you've seen some pretty insane game shows. Well, trust me when I say you ain't seen nothing yet. Like, how about a game where you have to cover yourself in chocolate sauce, or Dirty Norris as they called it on the show. No, not quite, but close. And then stick hair to the sauce and the hairiest would win.
You're going bald!
Or how about catching slop thrown out by a mad dinner lady and then having to eat it afterwards? Or how about holding a bag of cow guts for as long as you can in a scary attic, and if you hold onto it long enough, you win? And no, I'm not making that last one up. That actually happened.
So, Kaylee, did you drop your guts?
These games were gross, disgusting, insane, and by no means indulging in proper manners whatsoever. But that's why we loved them. They were so creative and insane that it's kind of hard not to want to take part in them yourself. But even with that, even if you have great games, many game shows from this period, especially from the BBC, just felt very generic and done before. Thankfully, the thing that prevented that for Dick and Dom was the laid-back feel of the show and the hosts themselves. Dick and Dom have always been ones to break the mold and do whatever they feel like, but with their own show, they had no barriers, no molds to break, they could just be themselves. And in many cases, this meant having to do improv and filling in gaps when things didn't quite go according to plan.
Kerry? Yeah? Do you look like that? No. No, you don't look like a moose. He's a very bad man. Would you like me to smack him?
Yeah.
Ready? And take it. There you go, it's for you. Let's do this till the batteries run out. Yay!
And amazingly, they would normally pull it off. For the most part. Well, more like 50% of the time. Okay, a lot of the times, things didn't always go too well.
Wow, hey, we playing that? We played that. Cut. We played that. Come back to us. No, you missed phony phone thing. Bat thinks on in a bit. No, the music stopped now. Now it's all gone wrong. It's all gone wrong. I suppose you think that's clever, don't you? Getting it wrong.
But these two would always manage to make it work and give both kids and adults something to laugh at. When you're a kid, you tune in for the muck and the cartoons, but when you're an adult, you watch to see two men in their late 20s act like kids, but then watch as it suddenly strikes them, what on earth am I doing?
You'll be about as famous as Cuthbert Dimmerwaite. Why did you find that picture of Morpheus Poindexter next week?
But I don't mean that in a bad way. As an amateur filmmaker, I know that there's nothing worse than when a plan falls apart like a bridge made out of toothpicks, but they still managed to make it entertaining when that did happen on the show.
We don't win a BAFTA, there's gonna be trouble! Are you judges watching this? I hope that you are! Cause there's gonna be real trouble!
Filming a show live is never an easy feat, but to film a show live at 9 AM in the morning with a load of kids around, that was pretty much a recipe for disaster. So if things went off without a hitch in the 4 years it was on air, then I think the universe would have collapsed from the impossible happening. But even when things did go wrong, they managed to either pull it off, or it was such a disaster that it was hard not to laugh at it. And while that might sound like the show could have been called ineffective or poorly made from a critical standpoint, bloopers are always a part of any kind of production. Whether you hide them or put them out in the open, they'll be there no matter what. And acknowledging your mistakes and using them to your advantage just showed how diligent and hard-working the crew, cast, and especially the main hosts were. And the majority of that comes down to how they play off one another.
Now, there's going to be people complaining to him.
Good old Dick and Dom, giving generously to children in need.
Oh, thank you, Terry. Let's go watch the cartoon. Very kind. Yes, that's the man to complain to, ladies and jelly spoons. Oh, look at it! Look at it go! What a job! I ask you, what a job! Oh my word! Right.
Dick and Dom's on-camera chemistry reminds me a lot of Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson's chemistry, particularly from the bottom TV and stage shows, and while they both mostly just play themselves, they do occasionally slip into on-stage roles which they forged from themselves over the years. Dick's stage presence, much like Rick's, comes across as very upbeat and optimistic, who often assumes the role of the showrunner or leader, even if it's misguided.
Dom's just turned it into carnage. Silly little man.
It's all on the floor.
You silly, silly little man. It was all going so well. What happened? And you started throwing that about.
And Dom takes on Ade's role, the passive-aggressive, cynical one who occasionally becomes violent when pushed too far.
I can now understand why people write in and complain.
With a lot less swearing and dirty jokes, of course. But there is one thing that Dom has that Ade never had on stage. Magic.
That's magic. Tell me, ooh, oh, magic. Ooh, that's magic.
And much like Rick and Ade on a bottom stage show, whenever something goes wrong, they immediately drop character and just watch the carnage unfold around them, or try to one-up each other with their performances, or trying to get the other one more dirty than they were. Especially Dick, because Dom hated getting his hair mucky because it made it curly. And I know I might just be seeing things that aren't there again like I normally do in my videos, but just look at these scenes back to back and tell me that you don't see a comparison in the performances.
Do you sell pants?
Ladies or men?
Men's pants?
Like a girl? Just do ladies.
Just do ladies' pants? Oh, shit. What are you laughing at that for?
You said pants to him.
Oh, you just said it again.
Oh, I've got it! Oh, this is black. Ooh. This is dark. This is evil. This is peculiar. This is mauve.
Get the f*** on with it!
Regardless, whether it was true or false in the real world, on camera the two seemed to love having fun with the ridiculous scenarios that would happen on the show, particularly Dick with his now famous hyena laugh which he would let rip whenever he found something hilarious.
I'm not happy.
If only
Alongside the crew for that matter, who you could often hear chuckling in the background at the group's expense along with the audience. I'm having trouble trying to decide if that's really poor professionalism or if it's just a way of compensating for the fact that there wasn't a live audience in the studio to laugh at them. Which, if that is the case, it's still better than any live audience you would get in a Chuck Lorre show. And while admittedly the pair's over-the-top and occasionally obnoxious behaviour and performance would be grating for some,
And now an impression of a mother watching at home. Oh, for goodness sake, change channels.
personally I never had a problem with it. Unlike comedians that have no sense of restraint like Dane Cook, Russell Brand or Chubby Brown, there was always that sense of self-awareness to them, like they knew what they were doing was mental and they made it seem a little less annoying for the adult audience, and you can see that. Even though they were acting like twits, they still had some maturity to them, which made their on-screen personas the perfect role for both kids and adults. Kids could laugh at the silly and messy humour,
Well done, Jerry. Well done. Jerry's pouring like that, that's it.
and adults could see the sense of pessimism and sarcasm that the two would subtly convey.
Nearly 30.
30 on the
yeah,
clock.
but look what we've achieved in these 30 years. Look where we are now. I'm sat on a peak ridden sofa, you got a wig on your head.
But despite the brilliance that stemmed from even the show's mistakes, the show was far from perfect. Despite the tireless efforts of Dick, Dom and the whole crew and cast involved, there were many things that went wrong that weren't even really that entertaining to watch it go wrong. A game wouldn't work from the very concept, the kids would act up and be practically psychotic at times, and technical difficulties from the complexity of having to run a show like this live. Something would always go wrong that would make them look like bigger idiots than they were and ruin the momentum of the show. Luckily, my show doesn't have any problems like that. These problems, despite their upbeat demeanour, would take their toll on the two many, many times, particularly Dom in the later series, who would occasionally have outbursts when his temper was pushed too far. Then again, if my best mate shoved a fork down my fingernail, I'd probably go mental on him with a hammer as well.
Whose idea was it to give me a fork? I stuck it in the end of my finger!
Anyone else want to mess with me?
Do you? Do you? You want to mess with me? Do you?
This is turning into a famous Jack Nicholson film!
It's hard to deny that from this and the high energy and muck seen during parts of the show, that to some onlookers it must seem like the most mindless and insane show on television, and some people at the time definitely thought so, from parents to critics, and even MP Peter Luff threw his hat into the flame war, saying it was the worst thing he'd ever seen in his life.
Well, frankly, I think it's an absolute disgrace.
Well, thank you, Peter.
Though hopefully with recent events that claim has now been rectified. But even with that, many people were able to see past the carnage and find the primal and core fun and enjoyment that any kid can see and be indulged by, and even some adults can get into that as well. And it all comes from a pair of lads that would end up looking like this at the end of every Saturday, and I can't deny that now that I'm older, I have a great amount of sympathy for them. They must have stunk to high heaven when they came home at night, and that's going to take like 15 showers and a scrub down in a decontamination chamber to get all that stuff off. But Dick and Dom would never have to go at their task alone. Always along for the ride were their stout-hardy fellow cast members. Actor, voice actor, impressionist, physical comedian and all-round jack of trades Ian Kirkby appeared many times playing many different characters, including the show's most infamous introduced character, DCI Harry Batt, who we'll be getting back to in a minute. Professional voice actor and puppeteer Dave Chapman provided all the puppetry and voices for many of the puppet characters like the Cat, the Talking Lasagna, Mr. Corn Beefhead, and the Picture Frame characters, as he'd had a long history with puppets in kids' TV, including being the operator and voice of Otis the Aardvark.
Let's say something clever. Okay, little kids out there and also grown-ups. Follow your dreams. You can do anything, go anywhere, study hard at school, ask permission from the person who pays the phone bill. Look after the old folk. They might have wrinkly faces, but they're still cool.
Which does make me wonder if that puppet's still hanging around in Dave's closet somewhere. That'll be a creepy thing to fall on you during a spring cleaning session. Dancer, presenter, and tomorrow's star, which wouldn't that technically make him today's star since that show was made in 2006? Melvin O'Doom, who also provided the roles of many introduced characters and impressed the nation with his sweet moves.
Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, let me rock Chaka Khan, let me rock, that's all I wanna do. Chaka Khan, let me rock Chaka Khan. Let me feel for you. Chaka Khan, what you think that you want to do? You feel for me.
I think you've made your point there, Melvin.
Which finally placed him in a role on Strictly not too long ago, so I guess he is today's star now. And character actor Lee Barnett played the most frequently seen returning character, the Prize Idiot. These guys would pretty much play any character or figure that Dick and Dom would need for a sketch, from representing representations of real people, to randomly created characters such as Raymond Newsreader, or the cat, a random feline that would appear in the duo's cat flap and make jokes or even retell them stories about places he visited before promptly getting a flap full of abuse from Dom. And while most characters would only appear and disappear after one episode, some would surprisingly stick around, such as the aforementioned Prize Idiot, who would display the prizes for the viewers for the phone-in games and often give off a few more puns.
I've been told good things come in small packages. Just throwing a little shirty. I've got my brownie points.
Finally, I'm here to put my money where my mouth is.
Still better than mine. With the exception of maybe this one.
Are you beating around the bush?
No, I'm beatboxing around the bush.
Now that one's bad even by my standards.
What's his name? George?
He's a bush.
Would anybody like to buy a bush?
But of course, the most famous and beloved character on the show was DCI Harry Bat, a spoof of your typical hard-hitting Geordie copper.
Accusing me of not being a proper copper would? I've been on the force 20 years, man. I've nicked everyone from Jimmy Neal to Robson Green. And believe you me, before things are out, I'm going to nick you, son, you big fluff.
Like Gene Hunt, though probably not quite as offensive. Funny thing is, by his own admission, he probably would have just been another one-off character if it wasn't for an in-joke played by Dom on the crew. To cut a long but hilariously story short, he first showed up in the first episode of Series 4 as one of the one-off characters, but when Dom was supposed to eat garlic mayonnaise for a phone-in game and sneakily swapped it out for vanilla yogurt, the crew decided to have some fun with the knowledge that they had and sent in Bat to arrest Dom and make him pay his penance.
Mr. Wood, we meet again, don't we, son? Huh?
I know what this is about.
Shut it! Right now, shut it! We've got reason to believe that you weren't eating garlic mayonnaise.
You absolute swine! Where's Walker? I'm gonna throw him!
Shut it, calm down, son. I'm in charge here.
Do you know this?
No!
Shut up!
Nothing to do with
Look.
it.
Which of course he weaseled his way out of, but Bat kept coming back to bring Dom to justice.
Come here! Come here!
It's me, you
Right.
And eventually became one of the most reoccurring characters in Series 5, getting 2 of his own games and even his final own back on Dom in the final episode.
It's payback time, folks! Are you going to be a big boy and eat your dinner up for all the lovely nice boys and girls at home? You're not?
He even had a pilot for a TV spin-off series made. Granted, it wasn't great, and it was only shown on TV through another show called Gina's Laughing Gear, but it is interesting to see how Harry would go at it on his own. But Rich and the short, fat, little hairy man didn't always have to rely on their often backstabbing crew to get laughs. In every episode, the pair would often play their own games for themselves out and about in the real world, oftentimes being pranks played on the public. The most famous, of course, being Bogies, which you would imagine from the title alone would have been one of the most disgusting games ever conceived, but it was actually a lot simpler than you would think. And a lot more funny as well.
The rules of the game are very simple. We take it in turns to say the word bogey, starting off party, getting louder and louder and louder until one of us bottles out, until one of us is louder than the other.
Bogies.
Bogies. Bogies! Bogies! Bogies!
Sod the Olympics, let's have every country in the world compete in this sport instead. They already did international versions, so why not have every country in the world get involved? But there were more games than just that. There was also the game where they would have to take turns sticking stickers onto people's backs, which would get bigger with each successive one, and the loser was the one that got caught. And that game was called... Inimi Makaraka Rera Dominaka Shikapapa Papa on Pom Stick. Yeah, because calling it as something on your back was too obvious a name, I guess. And that was a great game too, but my absolute favourite was a game called Dirty Day, which has a title that pretty much speaks for itself.
Do your best. Marvellous. Excellent behaviour, boys. Doing us proud. Bit of cricket poo. Oh my life. Flick it when in your mouth.
Flick it! Flick it! Face!
No, I don't like you, now go.
But one of the longest running features on the show was one that featured a character with a catchphrase that you've probably heard of before.
I've had enough of this, I'm going on the other side to have a bath.
All right, my darling.
Oh yes, and now you get to find out where I got that phrase from. for those who didn't play my contest last year where I told them there. Yes, Dick and Dom played their share of characters on the show as well, such as Dom's Little Bob Peep and Dick's Detective Inspector Mutton Chops, who in a way was kind of a precursor to DCI Harry Bat, but the most famous was Tom, Dick and Harry, a spoof of your stereotypical Cockney market owner and auctioneer who ran the game Forfeit Auction, where bungalow heads would take bets for lots with their points, which were setups that they could give to their fellow bungalow heads of their choice, which was basically meant dressing them up in embarrassing costumes and often getting mucky if they didn't achieve the task presented to them.
You said to the fish that you keep it warm in your trousers, but that means, what does the fish say back?
Yeah, I'd love to get out your trousers.
Hey, look, you're saying something else.
I've always wanted to be on Dick and Dom in a Bungalow. I'll give my life to be on that show. Well, you have.
But even if they did succeed, the boys still found somebody to terrorise, even if they probably shouldn't have.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dominic Wood will pour a bucket of rice pudding over that big man's head.
Would you mind standing up for that, please? Oh. Okay.
This was by far one of the best parts of the show, since it shows, in my opinion, just how sadistic kids can be to each other sometimes, but it also just shows the many ways that you can make a disgusting purplish-brown puddle on the floor.
The same old stuff, just a different way of doing it.
And it allowed me to gain 2 of my catchphrases. Thank you, Tom, Dick and Harry. Despite how great this show was though, it wasn't without its share of controversy. With this show this insane and willing to make all kinds of jokes, it's not hard to see why this show occasionally got into trouble. There was the previously mentioned Peter Luff rant on Question Time, but the most infamous was when Dom wore a shirt that said Morningwood in reference to his name, as well as a well-placed double entendre. And while I can definitely see the fuss parents would make about that, rather justifiably admittedly, I think most kids would understand it's meant to be a reference to his name and not know what the subtext is. The other big one was at the end of Series 4 where Dick pretended to be pregnant. And this wasn't just a 5-minute joke or anything either, they genuinely made it look as real as possible that he was in labour. And while I don't see this as too controversial, it is a case where you're just asking, why on earth did you do this? Though it did lead to some funny moments and one heck of a climax. If I do have to be impartial for the sake of criticism, since that is my job, there were some things about the show I could harp on. The production quality was so cheap it made Power Rangers look like The Hobbit. Not every game or sketch would work, and even the boys themselves would admit to that. The cartoons and extra padding would make the extra long runtime hard for some people to pay attention throughout the whole show, and the laid-back feel made it seem like just one level up from a children's improv group at your local charity centre. But really, who cares about that stuff? Anyone who loves Dick and Dom remembers that it wasn't about the little details, it was about the experience. Whether the experience of being on the show or watching the show, it felt like it truly captured the feel of being a child and the joys of childhood, and that's what made it one of the best shows of the 2000s, and why it's still so beloved today by more people than just me. Man, I don't think I've ever gone fanboy about anything like this before. I need to get a life. But despite the great setups and routines that made this show worth watching week after week, the boys, or the producers, or whoever was responsible, decided they need to shake things up a bit for the 5th and final series. The most significant is that, despite the previously enforced rule of no celebrities in the bungalow, every 6th bungalow head on the Saturday show would be a celebrity, and the Sunday show would have a person that was either a friend of the kids, or a random famous character or figure like Darth Vader and so forth.
Dominic, I am your father, you don't think I'm...
But the celebrities were the thing that caught people's eye for this series. And for those of you who were eagerly awaiting to see Jeremy Clarkson get a bucket of muck over his head, I'm afraid they weren't quite that famous. Some of the people they did get, though, were actually quite impressive. Ian Beale from EastEnders, Charlie Higson from The Far Show, stand-up Gina Yashere, Olympian Oliver Skeet, and even Andy McNabb. Yes, Andy flippin' SAS hero and English Tom Clancy McNabb was on the show. though of course since he was still a wanted man in some countries, he had to keep his face covered. Which does make sense, but it's also hilarious to think that Andy McNabb's former enemies are watching him on Saturday mornings on CBBC. There were some guests that in terms of their performance on the show weren't as good as others. For example, Toadfish from Neighbours and Brian Connolly were amazing and really got into it, and despite being out of their comfort zones, Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen and Kate Lawler really got into it as well, whereas some people such as Tony Christie and Ian McIntosh from The Office had really phoned in appearances and clearly didn't care to be there. Though to be fair, they were probably drafted in at the last minute anyway. But the most infamous was their first celebrity guest, pop star and former member of S Club 7, Rachel Stevens, who, despite knowing what she was getting into, refused to join in the messier side of the show and ran off set twice.
Second time today, that. She's wimped out. She don't want to get covered in muck.
Back to the game.
That's what it's all about, love!
Needless to say, Dick and Dom weren't very happy.
See, we don't mind having stuff thrown at us, love.
Shut up!
This was the first of a new series of Dick and Dom in a Bungalow, the show where Rachel Stevens legged it. Because she didn't want any of that on her face. Ooh.
As far to my knowledge, she never apologised to the pair, but either way, she went down in history as one of the Bungalow heads who refused to play along, even up to the final episode.
We slashed around in muck heaven, apart from the girl from S Club 7.
I can kind of understand her behaviour, but at the same time, you know what you're getting into. There's been 4 series of this, and you refuse to take part? I don't know, it just seems like a really cop-out thing in my opinion. Speaking of which, the final episode was one of the greatest finales ever for a TV show. With a show like The Bungalow, which is on its surface a Saturday morning kids show like Whack-A-Day or Tiz was, it would have been so easy to have a cop-out final episode where it's nothing but clips of previous shows and then it just ends. But not this show. Not only did nearly every celebrity guest come back for the final episode, the countdown to their top 10 favourite games that they had been doing over the last 10 weeks culminated on the last time they ever played their most infamous game, that being Make Dick Sick. A game that sadly takes on a very literal meaning whenever they do play it.
John went in a pizza place and he was eating his... Yeah, really horrible.
I'm getting my own back, look at it. Go on, mate.
It all food on my head and it was hot, wet, slimy, and it landed on my face.
It's the Gurning World Champion.
But the final moments of the episode were amazing. It featured as many old Bungalow heads, celebrity guests and Bungalow regulars that they could find for one final send-off and musical number, followed by the one final muckfest for everybody. Oh, it just brings a tear to the eye, doesn't it? But of course, all good things must come to an end, and Dick and Dom and the Bungalow did with its explosive final episode on February of 2006, after almost 5 years of entertaining kids and grown-ups from all over the country. And as I am living proof of this, so much so that I still have this signed picture of them that I got 11 years ago, which I had framed, this show left such an impression on fans that some of them have gone so far to recreate the set of the Bungalow in flipping Minecraft of all things. There's so much more I could have talked about with this show, but since the BFG video at the beginning of the year, it's probably best that I keep these videos shorter than the Peter Jackson movie, so let's wrap it up, shall we? But the ending of this show wasn't quite the end for the duo. They took a well-deserved break for a few years, but resurfaced in the early 2010s with the comedy adventure show The Legend of Dick and Dom, which was a spoof of Lord of the Rings using many of the humour, cast and jokes from The Bungalow. The Dick and Dom Diaries, which was a literal clip show of the best moments from The Bungalow, with some of the original footage filmed in between with the boys Ian, Dave, Melvin and Lee, but they really started to pick up steam with the second phase of their career when they did Dick and Dom Go Wild, a return to their old days of being reality show hosts.
I'm going to put my hand in there where that's just come out of. Yeah. Oh my life!
The British hosts of the Canadian-Australian game show Splatterlot, aka kid-friendly version of Wipeout, and are currently the hosts of Absolute Genius, again a callback to their early stages of their career. Dom would also go on to appear on a few solo projects between these phases of their career, such as the hamster-hosted show spin-off, Brainiac Science Abuse, Test Tube Baby.
It's Dr. Mozart!
And also appearing as a special guest on Series 2 of the show Rules of the Playground, where he really didn't hold back on some of the stories he told.
I had a mate who used to have a regular routine, which used to, flog the log. And that was always, really weirdly, after Neighbours, 6 o'clock. The accident ended up with this guy having plastic balls. Apparently he got really overexcited at the end of PE, took all his clothes off and thought it'd be great fun to run a full belt and try and jump over one of the coat pegs. He landed the other side, his balls were still attached to the coat peg. If you'd been given head, you were the king of the school. I remember this one guy, and he came back swaggering. He looked different when he walked into school after the summer holidays. And we were like, wow, what's wrong with him? Wow. And he was like, I've been given head.
Who needs me to destroy your childhood? Dom's there to do it for me. The two even appeared in the most recent incarnation of the Asterix the Ghoul film series, their second film appearance, though no one remembers their first one anyway. But they did do a really great job. Though it is a shame that Dom wasn't the one to play Unhygienics, because he really would have lived up to his nickname of the short, fat, little hairy man. And it's not quite the end for the pair either. They're supposedly the new hosts of Takeshi's Castle on Challenge, though that's yet to come about yet, and Absolute Genius is still running, but as for the Bungalow itself, well, Ian, Melvin, Lee and Dave all appeared on the spiritual follow-up to the Bungalow, The Slammer, and a majority of the crew also moved on to the show Shoot, which Dick and Dom also cameoed in, and the BBC did a great tribute to them in October of last year after 20 years of service to the company. But suffice to say, the Bungalow's been buried under a pile of muck and dust for the last 10 years, and despite rumours of a new series with different hosts, the original has only ever had one official DVD release, and many of the great memories of this show have remained buried. It is a shame that this show's never been released in home media by an episode-by-episode format. Though admittedly I can kind of understand why. With given how long these episodes are, it would be tricky, and it's not like the BBC has ever made a show with an episode with that long a runtime anyway. But for the meantime, we can still make do with all the clips on YouTube from home recording, so if you do love this show, feel free to relive those memories all over again. And if you are the BBC and happen to be watching this, then I never said any of that. But now, I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye! Well, wasn't that a short episode? Hey guys, me here again for one last tacked on Christmas message. I can't imagine mine's quite as glamorous as the Queen's, but I think I'll do for now. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the review you just saw, and I know that it must have been a bit of an odd choice for a Christmas year-end review, but it's a show that I've been meaning to do a review for a very long time now, and since it's my favourite TV show of all time, I felt of no better time to do that review, so I thought I might as well do it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and because I know I enjoyed making it. And yeah, we'll definitely have some more stuff coming in the following year. It's definitely been a good year for me this year in terms of my YouTube channel and anything else really, so I've definitely enjoyed it, and of course you guys have been the people that have made that happen, so thank you very much to all of you. But yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and a happy new year, and I'll see you all in 2018. Bye!